While Missouri's recruiting in high school is lagging behind previous seasons, would it make you feel any better if I told you this is the trend throughout the SEC?
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on today's program, I think the participants at SEC Media Days may have given Missouri fans a little bit of a hint about 2025 and some more positives as far as Missouri trending toward a top 5 basketball player in the country. I want to talk about that coming up here on the program in just a little bit. First, I do want to remind you this episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So definitely just visit FanDuel.com to get started. But you know what? I'm going to get started on today's show by talking more about Missouri's high school recruiting in football because, well, I think it's time for some more context. I know that one of Eli Drinkwitz's calling cards, of course, as Missouri's coach so far has been his ability to recruit. So when this latest class here, the 2026 class, is lagging a little bit behind in the rankings, I'd say it's understandable that some Missouri fans would start to get nervous. So here's the deal. I'm gonna attack this from a couple different angles. Let's start off by looking at it through the lens of the rest of the conference. Let's get some actual context here, which I think is really important, especially in this case. So with that said, let's bring up this handy dandy spreadsheet here put together by my colleague Jimmy Stein over at Locked On Bama. And when you look at the composite high school rankings for the SEC, well, quite simply, this 2026 class, the class that Missouri fans are worried about right now, well, the rest of the conference isn't doing so hot either. Now, Georgia's doing great, don't get me wrong, but let's look at the entirety of the SEC here, and what you'll find here is that, well, there were, all the way back in 2017, there were 9 teams in the top 25, then 8, 11, 9, 10, 10, topping out in the 2024 class with 13 of those teams in there, then 12, but now down to 8 this season. This is so far, of course, but just 8 of the SEC. And by the way, that is the fewest since 2018. And this is including Oklahoma and Texas too, not just 2 additional teams, but 2 traditional blue blood type of programs that would get in the top 25 traditionally with each and every year. And by the way, you look at 2021 here for some more context, 9 tied for the second lowest number of SEC teams with teams in the top 25. Well, you see there, just for some more context, Missouri at 26, Mississippi State at 27, just outside of the top 25 there. So what this is telling you is, you look at Texas Tech, for example, you look at these different teams outside of the SEC. Hey, the SEC, it turns out there are a lot of people with money out there. It's not just the Southeastern Conference. You can go with that landman oil money in Lubbock, West Texas, if you want to, for example. But the point here is that while Missouri's high school recruiting has taken a bit of a hit this year, you don't want to see these type of rankings each and every year going forward. It is worth pointing out that a lot of the SEC is seeing some of the same type of struggles, at least in the recruiting high school rankings, that Mizzou is at the moment. So context is king, and I just want to give all of you some of that right here. So with that said, here's my other angle on the class of 2026 for Mizzou football recruiting. I really think Eli Drinkwitz and his staff really like this year's roster, but I think they really like the roster for 2026. And this is something that Gabe DeArmond over at Power Mizzou mentioned recently. It's something I've been talking about all offseason, honestly, which is, while I'm obviously looking forward to the start of this 2025 Mizzou football season, I'm really looking toward 2026 as the year where Missouri can really break out and I think potentially make the college football playoff. Certainly it could happen this year too, but if you're going to make me bet, I think the 2026 team will be better than the 2025 team. And I think some of that, again, I've been talking a lot about resource allocation. So we're not just talking about, hey, how much do you spend on the portal versus high school, but maybe you push off your expenditures a little bit to the next season if you think, hey, we already like our roster for 2026. I think that does make a lot of sense on a certain level. And to this idea of resource allocation, well, think about Jackson Cantwell. Of course, Christian Cantwell's son, a big-time football prospect. Cantwell, of course, Christian, that is, an Olympian from Missouri, a national champion type of shot putter. Well, it really seemed like, I mean, talking to Brian Smith, the scout master at the Locked On Podcast Network, check out the portal, by the way, his show, but even just beyond my own opinions, talking to actual people who know much more about recruiting than I do, follow it much more closely than I do, everyone seemed to think that Jackson Cantwell, well, it was going to be Missouri was going to be tough to beat. A lot of people thought it was Missouri and Georgia. And then, of course, Miami came in and secured Jackson Cantwell's commitment. But more interestingly than the fact that Missouri didn't get Jackson Cantwell's commitment is that when he cut his Final Four down, when he cut his schools down to his Final 4 or 5, whatever it was, Missouri didn't make the cut. And that's the part that was surprising to me. It's not that Cantwell didn't pick Missouri. It's that the Tigers didn't even make the cut based on his final cut of teams. And that tells me something. And you do immediately have to ask yourself, what the heck happened there? Well, again, I think it's quite possible that Drinkwitz maybe feeling a little bit burnt by Williams Winery and Keywan Lacey and Courtney Crutchfield, some highly ranked players out of high school, maybe that, obviously in retrospect, using a bunch of dollars on those three guys, in particular Williams Winery, using some NIL dollars on those guys who were here and had very little production, let's put it that way, for Missouri last season, and now they're all gone. I think it's totally understandable if Drinkwitz and his program are asking themselves, was that a good allocation of resources? So again, for the millionth time, talk to me in 2026 about the transfer portal class. And then the 27, to a lesser extent, I would say the 27 high school recruiting class, but especially that 2026 portal class, if it's down significantly from what the rankings were the past 2 to 3 seasons for Missouri, that is once again the moment that Missouri fans should be concerned. And when it comes to the high school class of 2026, well, things are picking up for Missouri basketball, that is for sure. And not only did I tell you about the trending toward Jason Crowe for Missouri, a top 5 player in high school for the 2026 class. Missouri not only appears to be, there's more indications, let's put it that way, that Missouri is trending in that direction. So you know what? I want to talk about all that here in just a little bit. But you know what? First, let's talk about FanDuel, because when it comes to betting, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get some actual betting here in Missouri pretty soon, December 1st to be exact. So our long statewide nightmare is finally over. But if you're outside of Missouri, you know what? You're already following lots of action. So why not make it even better? With FanDuel, you can get in the game with your friends. And while they're getting sunburned, you're going to be inside enjoying sports. So lots of new daily promotions, easy to use, fast payouts. Hey, if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, a slight tangent here before we get into Jason Crowe, because what I'm about to tell you here is, well, technically premium information and understandably, a lot of people who are in the sports business who have premium content, you have to pay a subscription to their site, all that kind of stuff. They get very territorial about their information. I totally get it. But what's the equivalent of that in sort of the previous era of all this? Because back in the day, a newspaper, which, believe it or not, 20 years ago, yes, folks, I went to Missouri Journalism School and was a news ed person. In other words, yeah, newspapers were still a big deal when I was a kid. That's how old I am. But the point here is that, yes, newspapers were premium content back in the day. You had to buy a newspaper. Either you were you had a subscription, or you had to go to your newsstand and put in 50 cents or $1 for the Sunday edition, that type of thing. The point is, am I not allowed to talk about, like, say I bought a newspaper and then I go, hey, did you hear about this in the newspaper? That type of deal. At what point am I allowed to talk about what is in the newspaper? Now, here's the thing. If I talk about any information on the podcast, I always am all about crediting the proper source. And to that point, well, Missouri trending for Jason Crowe Jr., a top 5 player in the class of 2026, according to 24/7 Sports anyway. Well, Jason Crowe over at 24/7 Sports has put in a crystal ball prediction for Missouri getting Jason Crowe. So it sure seems like all the conventional wisdom is this young man, a top 5 player. Missouri just got Scotty Atkinson of the class of 26. This guy, who was already, I think, higher rated than Honor Boateng, for example, who is the highest ranked player from high school of Dennis Gates' recruiting so far. Well, this is just another level. So a very impressive addition here. Again, Travis Branham of 24/7 with the crystal ball prediction. Well, July 18th, folks, we're going to know semi-officially, we're going to know the verbal commitment anyway, and, well, the smart money is all on board for the Missouri Tigers at this point. So, honestly, here's another thing I've been thinking about. Another great Crow at Missouri. Of course, Sheryl Crow being one of the most famous alums in Mizzou history. Here's my other question, by the way. If we have 2 Crows, we got Jason Crowe and Sheryl Crow, does that make a murder of Crows? Or do I need at least 3 Crows to make a murder? By the way, I want the Crows publicist, by the way, because I would much rather be a murder of Crows than a gaggle of geese. Come on, what are we doing here as far as branding here, geese? But I digress. What's really interesting to me here is a lot of people are going, well, how much does this have to do with Tim Fuller, the recent general manager addition for Missouri? I really can't speak to that one way or the other. What I will say as far as Tim Fuller goes, certainly a month plus ago when Missouri and Dennis Gates decided to hire Tim Fuller as their next general manager, well, that came out of nowhere to me. I will say that. That was a very surprising addition, but an addition that made a lot of sense to me from Missouri and Dennis Gates' perspective for a whole bunch of reasons that I've gone to. I don't want to bore you everydayers with my take on that once again. What I am going to tell you is this is another angle I'm looking at. The fact that Fuller wanted to come back to Missouri, despite the fact that, let's be real, the Tim Fuller era at Missouri didn't end particularly well. He started off with Frank Haith, was retained by Kim Anderson. Nothing about the Kim Anderson era went well. And yet, in something that almost never happens, Tim Fuller is back at Missouri. What does that tell me? It tells me a couple things. It tells me he kind of likes Columbia. It tells me he doesn't hate living in this area, that's for sure. But more importantly, it tells me that he believes in Dennis Gates. He believes what he's building here, and maybe he thinks that he can supplement something here and make this program even better, add his skill set to what Missouri's already doing here. I already think Dennis Gates is an excellent coach, especially offensively. In this world, hey, just like when I think Eli Drinkwitz hired Kirby Moore to be his offensive coordinator, I think it's a little similar here. I think in this new NIL world, the free transfer world, college coaches have more on their plate than they've ever had in history. Makes all the sense in the world to take something off of Dennis Gates' plate, just like Eli Drinkwitz did a couple seasons ago. So I applaud Dennis Gates for hiring a general manager, period. It sure seems like Tim Fuller's a great move so far. And the official start of the countdown to college football always seems like it starts with media days, and with SEC media days coming next week, well, Missouri has decided who they're bringing, which players, and I think one of those selections gives us a little bit of a hint for 2025, and it's a positive one. So let's talk about that after these quick words. So I'll be honest with all of you. I am currently in Nashville, Tennessee, which is not the worst drive from here to Atlanta for next week's media days. And I kind of thought about doing that for all of you until Missouri got day 4. Yes, I'm not going to wait around Atlanta for 4 days until the final day of SEC media days, which is clearly the worst of all the days. So not the greatest draw for Missouri there, though not exactly a big deal other than for, well, media talking heads like me. But this is who is going to be joining Eli Drinkwitz in Atlanta a week from tomorrow, a week from Thursday. So that'll be July 17th, a day before we find out where Jason Crowe goes, by the way. So a lot of happening here on the Missouri beat. But joining Eli Drinkwitz is going to be Dalen Carnell, Zion Young, and also Missouri center Connor Tollison. And my biggest takeaway here is that I truly don't think that if Missouri was worried about Connor Tollison's knee, that he'd be joining them in Atlanta. I think if he had any type of significant setbacks, if he weren't on track to be ready for the start of the season and ready to be a very, very good SEC center like he's been the last couple seasons, well, I just don't think Missouri would have been exposing him in Atlanta. So maybe I'm going too far with this take, but my instincts are telling me that, well, Tollison, who had a serious knee injury in the Oklahoma game late in November, late last season, obviously, the late in the season nature of that injury, timing-wise, not ideal for 2025. So that's something I've been kind of trying to get hands on, keep track of all offseason. I think, if anything, we got a pretty big hint there that at least Missouri is optimistic about Tollison and his chances of suiting up and being a really good center for Missouri this season in the Southeastern Conference. And by the way, there's been some news out there with all of the massive changes we've seen in college football and basketball, particularly the past few seasons. Well, it turns out LSU is looking to add a advertisement patch to their jerseys, like you've seen in Major League Baseball and the NBA here in recent seasons. For example, I think the Boston Celtics, what do they have? It's Vistaprint or something like that. I can't remember what Boston-based business is on their patch. But the point here is this is a one of many Rubicons that have been crossed here, that potentially could be crossed here in the case of these advertising patches on uniforms. But there have been a lot of different things that have been crossed. Heck, for all intents and purposes, they aren't being called employees, but pretty soon, more or less, Missouri football players and basketball players in particular are more or less going to be employees of the university. At least they're going to be compensated directly. Regardless of what you think of that, that was pretty unthinkable even 10 years ago. That type of thing. That would truly be happening in the 2020s of college football. So my point here is that I think if you're a Missouri fan, is that a Rubicon that we should cross? My answer is, gosh, if LSU is doing it, yeah, then we probably got to keep up with the Joneses. I got to be honest, because for as much fun as I've had with LSU fans over the last couple of years about the whole blue blood discussion, obviously LSU at this moment is another level in terms of a football program of Missouri. So if you're Missouri, humble yourself and go, wow, if the LSU Tigers, if the Bayou Bengals are doing this, maybe this is something that Missouri should consider as well. And if I'm just going to ask you all, what would be your ideal sponsor on a Missouri uniform? I'm a Missouri patch, that type of deal. Obviously, a Como institution, like say, I don't know, Shakespeare's Pizza, that type of deal would be really cool. But if I had to guess, if there's going to be a sponsor on a Missouri uniform one day, maybe as soon as 2026, if I had to guess, who is that sponsor going to be? I'm going to stroke my beard and say, I'm going to say Equipment Share. How about that? Maybe Veterans United in a close second. But those are my ideas. What do you all think? Who would you like to see? Who do you think it's going to be? And also, what are your feelings on this Missouri football recruiting class in high school for the 2026 class? Are you worried? Do you trust in Drinkwitz? And by the way, how about this Missouri basketball recruiting too? Hit me up with all your thoughts on social media everywhere at Locked On Mizzou, or email me lockedonmizzou@gmail.com. And thanks for as always, for making this show your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Brian Smith on the portal. I promise you're not going to regret it. He's got the hottest show on the network right now. There's a reason for that. Find out why for yourself on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. Again, that is the portal with the Scoutmaster, Brian Smith. So until next time, I'm John Miller. Thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.